Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Drop of Magic by L.R. Braden, narrated by Heather Costa. Chapter 1. Metal dust clung to the sweat on my arms, glittering like shining scales. Even with the studio door propped open behind me, the uncommonly warm October air did little to temper the heat of the forge. A shower of sparks erupted as I plunged the carbon steel rod back into the annealing embers and dragged an arm across my forehead, taking care to avoid the bulky, blackened welding glove. I'd probably still end up with sooty streaks decorating my otherwise pale face. I always did. Lost in the beat of my old MP3 player, I started belting out the lyrics of Robert DeLong's Don't Wait Up as I prepared the next rod. Then a touch settled, light and tentative, on my arm, and the bottom fell out of my stomach. Tongs clutched in one hand, hammer in the other. I spun. "Whoa, whoa," his lips formed the words, though I couldn't hear them over the music blaring through my headphones. An inch shorter than I was, wearing jeans and a polo shirt, I had no reason to think the man was anything but human. But then, who could tell these days? He took a step back, hands raised, either to show he meant no harm or to ward off the blow he thought was coming. Behind him, near the open door, stood a second man. He wore a rumpled brown suit that matched his hair and eyes. Average height, average build, average looks. Nothing remarkable about him. Moving to put the anvil between us, I set the hammer down and pulled off my headphones, but kept a white-knuckled grip on the tongs. The higher-than-average number of violent crimes this summer had me on edge, along with everyone else, though none of the violence had come so far as my neck of the woods. It seemed unlikely a murderer would get my attention before attacking, but my heart raced a mile a minute as I faced the strangers. "Who are you?" The man nearest me lowered his arms. "We announced ourselves, but it seems you didn't hear." I scowled at his attempt to put the blame back on me. This was my studio, and they were uninvited guests. "My apologies." This came from Mr. Unremarkable. The monotone of his voice matched his appearance, revealing nothing. "You may call me Smith. My associate is Neil. Am I addressing Alessandra Blackwood?" A muscle under my right eye twitched. Most people only knew me as Alex. Alessandra hadn't existed anywhere but legal documents since I was 12, and traded the name in for something stronger, more practical. "We've come to purchase an item from you, an engraved silver box." My shoulders dropped as the tension in them eased a little. Customers didn't often stop by the studio unannounced, but it wasn't unheard of. People sometimes got my address from the sold art gallery in Boulder, where I showed my work, or from previous customers and came to commission pieces. Most were courteous enough to call ahead. "I'm booked on orders right now. I could maybe get to it next month." "You misunderstand. We are looking for an object already in your possession." "Oh, well, sorry to disappoint, but I don't have an item like that in stock." "We know the box came your way. If you hand it over, we can make it worth your while." Neil had the slick, sleazy tone of a used car salesman. Curious though I was about this box, and why they thought I had it, I'd had enough of the conversation. Even if they weren't killers, they gave me the creeps. I shook my head. "You were misinformed." "Ms. Blackwood," Smith said, "be reasonable. We're willing to pay handsomely, and considering the other parties involved, you're not likely to get a better offer. Surely it isn't worth the risk." My breath caught as the thinly veiled threat hit me like a punch in the gut. "You need to leave now." My voice trembled slightly. The studio only had one door, and they were between it and me. I was trapped. Shifting my stance, I tightened my grip on the tongs, willing them not to shake. Smith raised his hands in a placating manner. "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. You might not even realize you have the item we seek. It would look quite common, like a jewelry box." "I told you, I haven't got anything like that. Now get out of here before I call the cops." It was a bluff, of course. I'd left my cell phone in the house. Even if I could call, the police would never arrive in time to help. That was the downside of living so far from town. I was on my own. "Enough of this." Neil stepped around the anvil and reached for my arm. Time slowed. I didn't like to fight. I avoided confrontations when I could. But if he thought I was going to roll over, he was wrong. With a guttural howl, I twisted my wrist out of Neil's grip and swung the tongs into his face. His skin split apart like newspaper peeling back from a fire, scorched black and crinkled around the edges. An unearthly shriek filled the studio, and I stumbled back, shocked at the damage I'd done. Neil shimmered and seemed to melt. His skin became transparent, and a network of blue veins crawled beneath its surface. His nose spread and sank into his face, leaving 2 flared slits. Below that, the mouth emitting that horrible sound, elongated, until the gaping, needle-lined hole grew so large I could have put my whole fist in without scraping my knuckles. When he reached up to cover his face, his fingers had nearly doubled in length, the webbing between them connecting all the way to the tips. His fingernails stretched and thickened to claws. The creature before me was straight out of a horror movie, and I added my own scream to the cacophony. Wielding my tongs like a baseball bat, I backed away from the writhing shape, which had been the man Neil seconds before. Even at the best of times, my stomach cramped when someone mentioned the Fae. Seeing one in the flesh was like having a bucket of ice water dumped on my head. I shivered from head to toe and fought the urge to throw up. Smith crossed the space between himself and Neil in 2 steps and pulled Neil's arms down to expose the hideous gash burned across his cheek. My stomach lurched at what I'd done. White glinted where bone showed beneath charred flesh. The eye above had swelled shut and was rapidly turning a sickly greenish color. Smith placed one palm against Neil's forehead, and the horrible wail abruptly cut off as Neil sagged in Smith's arms. "It seems we were mistaken," Smith spoke as he had before, without inflection or emotion. Nothing to show surprise or concern that he was holding an unconscious, injured fairy in his arms. "Good day, Miss Blackwood." My mind went blank as I fumbled for words. Smith took my stupefied silence in stride. Hefting Neil without visible effort, he gave a small parting nod and carried his companion out of the studio. I remained where I was until the sound of car doors closing and the crunch of gravel told me I was alone. Then, still clutching my tongs, I inched to the door and took a deep breath of the outside air. The driveway was empty. No cars in sight. No fairy goons either. My knees gave out under the weight of the panic I'd been keeping in check, and I sank to the ground, tongs still clutched in my shaking hands. The tea I'd had for breakfast felt like acid in my stomach, threatening to come back up. A gray tabby with yellow-green eyes peeked around the corner of the shed with a questioning, "Meow?" Cat had appeared on my doorstep a few months back, begging for scraps, and I'd made the mistake of giving him some. He'd come around every day since. Despite the fact he'd already stuck around longer than most of the guys in my life, I had steadfastly refused to name him. "Fat lot of good you were." Lifting his nose, Cat swished his tail and stalked away. It was silly to take my anxiety out on Cat, but it was easier than dealing with the panic and adrenaline threatening to overwhelm me. Anything to distract from the flesh seared to the tongs in my shaking hands. I couldn't imagine forging more, so with a wary eye on the door, I dampened the coals and stored my tools, each in its marked place on my pegboard. The gooey tongs went on a shelf. I'd throw them in an acid bath later. The oversized shed I used for a studio was a short walk from the ranch-style house on the 7 acres of Colorado mountainside I called home. Shutting the door on Cat's meows for handouts, I poured a glass of water with trembling hands and guzzled it down to steady my nerves. My first instinct was to call Uncle Saul. Not really my uncle, he was the closest thing I had to family since an accident took my mother and left me orphaned at 17. It wasn't just for comfort that I thought of him, though. Few people outside the PTF, Paranatural Task Force, had seen a fae without glamour since the end of the Faerie Wars a decade before, and those who did were required to report it. Like many officers from the war, Saul joined the PTF to help police the fae after the peace treaties were signed. They kept the registries of all the fae and halfters who ventured off the reservations, as well as the few magic-wielding human practitioners not on the leash of the church. They also investigated reports of paranatural activity, magic misuse, and the possible existence of other creatures, like vampires, aliens, and ghosts, though only the fae and practitioners had ever been substantiated. I wasn't sure exactly what Saul's job with the PTF was, just that he was a pretty big muckety-muck whose work was classified. His assignments often took him out of the country and off the radar, and he'd left for another such mission last month. He'd been incommunicado for at least another week, which meant I'd have to call the local PTF office just like anyone else. Pushing back the unruly auburn hair that had escaped my ponytail yet again, I picked up my cell phone. The voicemail icon blinked in the corner. I'd completely forgotten about Aiden's call the night before. After a hectic afternoon installing my work at the gallery, and 4 hours schmoozing with people whose clothes cost more than my car, I'd wanted nothing more than to fall into bed. Aiden was a dear friend, but it was hard to compete with a soft mattress at the end of a long day, and sleep ultimately won out over what was sure to be one of his classic, the world is out to get me, paranoid tirades. I hesitated, staring at the icon, but conversations with Aiden tended to drag on, and I had my own mess to sort out at the moment. Most cities had a PTF office, but Nederland was too small to warrant its own staff, so I punched in the number for the Boulder branch. First, I suffered through the standard automated menu. Press 1 if you think you may be paranatural, 2 if you want to report someone you think may be paranatural, etc. Then there was the call center secretary, whose job seemed to be to test how long people would stay on hold. I drummed my fingers against the counter as my irritation grew with every transfer, hold music grating in my ear. Finally, I found my way to an actual agent.
"Ben O'Connell here," the gruff voice said. "You have an incident to report?"
"Yes, 2 guys threatened me, and at least one was a fairy."
"What makes you think that?"
His condescending tone put me on edge, like he didn't think I was qualified to identify a fae without the special training he'd undoubtedly had. For starters, his face melted when I hit him with my iron tongs.
"You what?"
I jerked the phone from my ear in pain. When I brought it back, he was mid-rant.
"How dangerous it is to confront a fae?"
"It's not like I meant to," I snapped defensively. "He grabbed me, and I reacted. Besides, I didn't know he was a fae before that."
"Fine."
He sounded only mildly placated.
"What happened next?"
"I guess his glamour broke because he stopped looking like a person."
"Yes, iron will have that effect."
I could practically see him nodding.
"What did he look like without his glamour?"
"About 6.5 feet tall, see-through skin, webbed hands, no nose, and a huge mouth full of teeth like needles."
"A sea fae, then. What about the other?"
He looked human, but he didn't seem surprised when his friend changed. If he wasn't a fae himself, he at least knew the other guy was.
"Can you describe him?"
I tried to remember specifics about Smith's features, but he appeared in my mind only as the vague impression of a man. He had brown hair and eyes, and he was wearing a brown suit.
"Did you get their names?"
"Yeah, but I doubt they were real. The fae was Neil, and the second guy called himself Smith."
"Did they say what they wanted?"
"They were looking for an engraved silver box."
"Do you have this box?"
"Nope, I've got no clue what they were talking about, or why they thought I had it."
"All right, Ms. Blackwood. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. If your visitors are registered, we should be able to track them down through their visas. There aren't many sea fae in this area."
As part of the peace treaty that gave the fae sovereignty over their reservations, the powers that be also negotiated visas that restricted and recorded fae presence on human lands. The fae reservations were nations unto themselves, where the human government had no jurisdiction, and humans were strictly prohibited from entering. In exchange, any fae who wanted to leave the reservation had to register with the PTF and apply for a visa that monitored the length and purpose of their stay. Considering their actions, I held little hope my visitors had followed the rules.
"In either case, we'll try to locate them and bring them in for questioning. Then we'll contact you with any findings deemed safe for release from your case file."
I grimaced at the bureaucratic parlance that boiled down to, "Don't hold your breath."
"If you have any further contact with them, report it immediately."
"I will." I pressed the disconnect button and glared at the phone. If only Uncle Saul had been available. I was still holding the phone when a knock at the door made me jump. My heart rate went into overdrive. Neil couldn't have recovered already, but Smith? Pocketing the phone, I crossed to the front window and peeked out. A short, round woman with dark skin and darker hair stood on my porch. I breathed out, but my shoulders refused to relax. There was a reason I lived miles from the nearest town. It was rare for me to get a single visitor in a week, which was just the way I liked it. This was nothing short of an invasion. I pulled the door open enough to speak, but left the chain in place. "Can I help you?" The woman straightened as though she could make up for the difference in our height with sheer will. "Miss Blackwood?" "Yes, I'm Detective Garcia." She indicated a polished badge on her belt. "I work for the Lakewood Police Department." I narrowed my eyes, frowning. "What can I do for you, Detective?" She gestured to the cracked door that separated us. "May I come in?" Clenching my teeth, I slipped the chain off the door and stepped back. "What's this about?" "I just need to ask you some questions." She pushed past me and paced straight to my dinged-up dining table. I made a detour to the attached kitchen, where I poured a mug of coffee from the half-empty pot left from that morning and zapped it in the microwave. "Want a drink?" "No, thank you." She pulled out a seat facing me, her back to the wall, and plucked a small notebook and pen from her pocket. I sat across from her, clutching my warm mug in both hands. My knee jumped like a jackhammer under the table. "So what's this about?" "I'm part of a special task force investigating a number of possibly connected deaths." My stomach turned to lead. Had the police finally found a connection between all the recent murders? But what's that got to do with me? Garcia watched me with an unreadable face. "Are you familiar with a man named Aiden Day?" The pressure in my gut spread to my lungs. I didn't like where this was going. "He's a friend. We went to college together." "Why?" "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Mr. Day is dead." The mug slipped from my fingers. I was only dimly aware of coffee spilling across the table and dripping to the floor. My vision began to swim. I crossed my arms over my stomach and rocked in time to the throbbing in my ears until I remembered how to breathe. "He was killed in his home last night." Garcia's voice sounded distant, as though she were at the far end of a tunnel. I slammed invisible chains over the door behind which my emotions pounded. A cold hollowness enveloped me, and I welcomed it like an old friend. I hid in that emptiness like a child in a blanket, waiting for the monsters to pass. "When did you last hear from him?" I remembered his picture flashing across my screen, and the voicemail I'd put off listening to. "Oh my God!" "What?" Garcia perched at the edge of her seat, looking as though she wanted to vault the table and wring her answers out of me. "He called me last night, but I was tired. I didn't answer." My voice caught on the implication. Could it be my fault he was dead, because I'd been too wrapped up in my own life to answer the damn phone? My message may well have been the last words of a dying man. Fumbling the phone out of my pocket with shaking fingers, I accessed my voicemail and put it on speaker. "Alex?" Aiden's characteristically tense voice was pitched low, carrying my name through the receiver in a hoarse whisper. "Damn it, what's the point in having a cell phone if you don't pick up? Listen, I think someone's watching me. I've got this feeling, you know? Anyway, you should pick up the present for your grandfather as soon as you can. Okay, well, I'll talk to you tomorrow." As the message cut off, Garcia and I stared in silence at the phone in my hand, processing words cast back to us by a ghost. Garcia recovered first. "Do you have any idea who might have been following him?" I shook my head. Aiden always said stuff like that. He always thought someone was out to get him. When we were in college, he thought people were planting devices in his room to spy on him. He wouldn't let anyone into his house until he'd run a background check. He was paranoid. Maybe he had reason to be. Did he ever mention who might be out to get him, or why? No. His paranoia seemed totally illogical. Just a weird quirk. When we asked him about it, he'd get all secretive and say it wasn't safe to talk. You never saw any evidence that he was being targeted? Like I said, I thought he was just being paranoid. But that part about picking up a present for my grandfather. What about it? I don't have a grandfather. I haven't got any relatives. Aiden knew that. Could it be a misdirect to confuse whoever he thought was watching? I shook my head. I don't know. If he was trying to confuse someone, he did a good job, because I have no idea what he was talking about. Garcia pulled a digital recorder out of her pocket. I'd like to make a copy of that message. Of course. I played the message again, choking up at the end. Turning away, I scrubbed at the pressure building in my eyes and tried to push away the conviction that if I'd only answered the phone that night, I might have prevented my friend's murder. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Home invasion. We don't know what, if anything, was taken. But the house was tossed." Garcia paused before adding, "Your friend put up a fight." I pictured Aiden fighting for his life and clenched my fists. Why hadn't he just run? But then, that was just like him, fighting even when he knew he couldn't win. "We haven't released the name or details yet," Garcia said, "so please keep this to yourself for the time being." Without thinking, I blurted, "I have to tell David," then added, "He was Aiden's only real friend besides me." Garcia flipped to a back page in her notebook. "Would this be David Nolan?" "Yes. I'm planning to speak with him later today. I'd appreciate it if you'd wait until tomorrow to talk to him." Garcia's tone made it clear that appreciate really meant insist, and I wasn't going to like the outcome if I didn't comply. It pissed me off, but I could understand the reasoning. "You and Mr. Nolan were the only emergency contacts listed with Mr. Day's employer. Do you know if he had any living relatives?" I shook my head, a cavern opening up in my chest. "He didn't." She nodded and made a quick stroke in her notes. The finality of the motion made me cringe. "When will his body be released?" Garcia's eyes softened. "You'll need to contact the coroner's office for that information." I didn't need to know, not really. Aiden had a standing order at a crematorium. David and I had teased him mercilessly when he told us about it. Now? Well, I rubbed at the pressure behind my sternum, trying to ease my breath. All I had to do was scatter the ashes when they arrived. Flipping her notepad closed, Garcia pushed back from the table. "Thank you for your help, Ms. Blackwood." I held up a hand to stop her as a thought struck me. "A couple Fae came to my studio this morning, looking for a box they seemed convinced I had. Do you think it could have to do with Aiden? If he meant for me to pick something up." Garcia sat back down. "What happened exactly?" "They were looking for a silver box. When I said I didn't have it, one of them tried to grab me, and I hit him with the iron tongs I was holding. His glamour broke, and he passed out. The second guy seemed to believe I didn't have what they were looking for, and they left." If they were killers, you'd probably be in the morgue, but the timing is suspicious. I'll check with the PTF, look for a connection." "What agent did you speak with?" O'Connor, something like that. He's in the Boulder office." "Thank you, Ms. Blackwood." Garcia held out a business card. "If you think of anything else, call me." I took the card, swallowing a lump in my throat. "Please find who did this to my friend." She nodded. "I intend to." Kat was still on the porch when I opened the door for Garcia. For a moment, I considered letting him in, just to have another heartbeat nearby. Then Garcia's SUV started down the drive, and I closed the door, on the offer of comfort, in those big green eyes. Crossing the living room, I picked up one of the framed pictures on my stone mantel. It showed David, Aiden, and me making silly drunken faces on a spring break beach in Mexico. The dull ache in my chest sharpened, growing deeper. When I'd started college, I'd been alone. No parents, no relatives, no friends. A lifetime of moving had left me with few real connections, and no delusions about lasting relationships. David changed that when he sat next to me in freshman lit and struck up a conversation, despite my best efforts. 2 months later, he introduced me to his eccentric roommate, Aiden, and the three of us became inseparable. With Aiden gone, it felt like a piece of my heart was missing. I stared at the photo until a growling stomach reminded me I was still alive. Hobbled by the order not to contact David until the following day, I found some leftovers in the fridge, ate them cold, and turned in for an early night, all the while clinging to the dim hope that a good night's sleep would bring a better tomorrow. Chapter 2. From the mouth of the valley, a warm wind blows the scent of decay into my face, whipping my hair into a tangled curtain. I stand alone on a field of death. Corpses of fallen soldiers litter the ground as far as the eye can see, and every face is my father's, staring at me with blank eyes. I clench my jaw against the familiar pangs of anger and loss, that threaten to break free of the prison in which I locked them so long ago. Rows of humans in shining armor stand under the banner of the church's sorcerer troop on the hill to my right. A horn sounds. Hazy red sunlight glints off metal as they begin their descent into the valley. To my left, the fairy hordes scream their battle cry. From monsters that make my blood run cold to angels whose beauty bring tears to my eyes, the fairy army begins its advance. It isn't safe. I turn toward the voice. Aiden? He nods, staring into me with one dark, heavy-lidded eye. A shock of straight black hair covers the other. What are you doing here? Keeping my promise. Promise? Aiden pushes back his hair, revealing a swollen eye. His ochre skin is bruised purplish black, and blood oozes from a gash in his cheek. When he smiles his lopsided smile, his teeth are stained red from the split in his lip. He looks just like he did the night he saved me. The night he promised he would always be there for me. They're coming for you, he says. Who? Everyone. Waves of darkness crash in from either side, crushing me between them. My eyes snapped open, heart hammering against my ribs, strings of sweat-drenched hair plastered to my clammy skin. I untangled myself from the twisted sheets and focused on slowing my breath. Aiden's battered face dredged up a memory I hadn't thought of in years. Sophomore year, when I was dumb and naive, and I'd had way too much to drink. I left a party with some jock I barely knew. By the time I realized my mistake, I was in the middle of nowhere, with a man twice my size. I shivered at the memory of meaty hands pawing me, a warm tongue probing my lips. Aiden had tried to stop me at the party, told me I was drinking too much, but I'd ignored him. Not just ignored him, I'd chased him off, accused him of ruining my fun. But on that godforsaken hillside, it was twerpy little Aiden who yanked open the door of that jock's Firebird. He got his ass kicked that night, but he saved me. That was the night he promised he'd always be there for me, no matter what. The ache in my chest made a mockery of that promise, and it was my own damn fault. Once again, I'd been stupid and selfish, and Aiden had paid the price. I'd been too wrapped up in my own damn life to answer the phone. One simple act that could have changed everything. Now Aiden's face had joined those of my father and mother to haunt my dreams. I wiped a trail of tears off my cheek. The clock on the nightstand read 5:23 a.m. The early hour, coupled with a long night of jumping at every snapping branch and creak of the house, for fear some homicidal maniac had come to murder me, left cobwebs clinging to my thoughts. I rubbed the grit from my eyes and cringed at the rancid flavor in my mouth. I needed more sleep, but that dream had robbed me of any desire to close my eyes again. Besides, I was scheduled to open at the bookstore. I draped an arm over my forehead and sighed. Maybe I should quit my day job. With my art doing so well, I didn't need it. But I couldn't do that to Maggie. She was more than just my bibliophile boss. She was a friend. As roommates in college, we'd gotten into and out of more trouble together than I cared to remember. I couldn't leave her hanging. Plus, working at the bookstore kept me from becoming too much of a crazy shut-in. Shaking off the disturbing dream, I stretched to my full extension, feet dangling off the end of the bed, while my palms pressed flat against the headboard. I shuffled to the kitchen in slippers and a t-shirt, switching lights on as I went, until I reached the coffee maker I'd treated myself to last Christmas. It didn't do anything fancy, like cappuccinos with swirly patterns in the foam and whatnot. But the built-in timer meant coffee was ready and waiting when I stumbled over to pour myself a mug of steaming black caffeine. I downed half the cup in a single gulp, topped it off, and carried a bagel slathered with cream cheese to the bar that separated my kitchen and living room. Chewing a bite of bagel, I contemplated my phone. I'd missed a call from David shortly after passing out last night. Guess that meant the cops were done with him. He probably wasn't awake yet, but Aiden's death hung over me like a black cloud, threatening to drown me in sorrow. "Alex?" He picked up faster than expected. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I bit my lip." Did the police talk to you?
Yeah, I can't believe Aiden's gone. I wasn't able to sleep at all last night. How are you holding up?
I'm managing. Not sure it's really hit me yet. I was hoping we could get together today. I work till 4, but I could come over after.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?